On behalf of Tom Johnson, my name is Eric Osgood. I'm the Select Board Chair. I want to welcome Congressman Welch and all of you, and I hope you find today to be informative and beneficial. Thank you.
It's a good lunch. Local, right? First of all, thank you so much. It's great to have your representative here. Thank you. Are you playing hooky?
Yes.
You missing some votes?
No. We do have committee discussion today on a couple of bills, but
All right.
check with the chair.
We're gonna make it worth your while. Tasha's gonna open it up after I make a few remarks, right? Yeah, you were gonna say something.
What? Yes, thank you.
I want to say a couple of things. Since everything is going so smooth in Washington these days, we have time to focus on something that's important, and that's rural broadband. And I want to put it in a context that's really important to me. We have such a challenge in this country, and definitely in Vermont, about the pressure on rural America. We see that a lot of the population is moving to big cities. A lot of the local rural economy is under enormous stress. Agriculture, the schools that are declining in population that are central to community life, our community hospitals that are so absolutely essential to community life are under a lot of pressure. And a lot of us believe we've really got to focus on revitalizing rural America, rebuilding the economies. And you can't do that without rural broadband. There has to be high-speed internet as a tool that's comparable to what we have in our municipalities. And the decision that we have to make in Congress, in my view, is very similar to the question that was raised in the 30s around electrification. And then, as now, there's not a particularly compelling economic case to get the big providers to invest in sparsely settled parts of our country, rural America, when they get much more bang for the buck and return on investment when it's in the urban areas. But we made a decision in the 30s. It was a political and social decision. And it was that we weren't going to leave rural America behind. And it was an acknowledgement that a lot of the values that we really admire in our country are very much embodied in folks who are self-reliant, who have a tradition of helping one another, who have a strong commitment to community. And those are characteristics that I think all of us find to be true of the rural places that we live. And a lot of us believe those are values that America could use more of. So the decision in the 30s was for rural electrification, and it served us very well. That's the comparable decision we have to make now, is, in my view, about broadband. And it has to be, the term we're starting to use is future-proof, where we don't want to settle in rural America for just upgraded speeds from what we have now. There was a lot of discussion about 5G, and I was pointing out that in lots of parts of Vermont we have no G. And what we don't want to have is a policy where we make modest improvements, but we're still lagging far behind. And where when future technological advances are made, we don't then get stuck with a system that was okay at one point but is way behind at this point. Now, the one piece of good news on this is that we're all lamenting the incredible partisanship and divisions in Washington. And that's not why we're here today. But in the area where there's enormous common ground for me to work with a lot of my Republican colleagues is on rural broadband in rural America. Because when I'm talking to them, a lot of my Republican colleagues represent the rural parts of the country. But when I'm talking to them about concrete things that are challenges for us in Vermont, like broadband, or how do you keep your local hospitals open, or what are you doing about job training, or what can we do about the local farm economy? Those challenges that we face here are identical to what they're facing there. And what's resulted from that is that on broadband, we've developed this rural broadband caucus that I and a Republican colleague started. And we've got like 40 members, evenly divided. And we're all pushing very, very hard. And it's on this principle that we've got to have the same quality of broadband in rural America that we have in urban America. And some of that will be money, obviously. There's discussion about an infrastructure bill, and all of us in the broadband caucus. And again, I point out that there's a lot of Republicans are committed to putting money in, so that aspect of the challenge we can address. There's a number of us, and a couple of my very conservative colleagues from across the aisle are supportive of this, where one potential source of money is a new broadband spectrum. There's these satellite companies that are foreign-owned, about 4 of them were given or lent some broadband spectrum. It belongs essentially to the taxpayers. They don't need it. And there's estimates that it could be sold at public auction for like $40 billion. The broadband companies that have never paid for this are saying they'd like to have that $40 billion. But a lot of us are saying, but you know what? We could use that in Johnson. You know, we could use that in Hardwick. And again, both sides. So I just want to set that framework, because there's an immense amount of bipartisan interest in Congress from both sides of the aisle to have as a goal that we have broadband speeds that are equal to urban areas, and an acknowledgement that if we're going to revitalize our economies here, there's no chance to do it without the benefit of high-speed internet. So that's my comments, and then Tasha, do you want to just bring us up to date on what?
Sure.
And then after that, let's just everybody go around and quickly give them names. And I'm really glad, Dan, that you're here, because I know how much the state is working on this. I know Governor Scott's really concerned about it, and I suspect what I said about a bipartisan concern is probably true in the State House as well.
Yeah, absolutely, it sure is. I was trying to figure out how to solve this problem for rural areas.
Yeah.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Tasha Wallace, Executive Director of the Lamoille County Planning Commission. I know very many of you. Leah Kilbadovia, who is our staff person on this issue, wasn't available today, so I'm stepping in. If I make anything up, Rob Fish and Clay Purvis are here from the state, and they can correct any of those errors. We received, working with Northern Vermont Development Agency, which works up in the kingdom, a grant through the USDA to work closely with municipalities on the broadband issue, because right now, a lot of what can happen in terms of broadband improvement is centered around municipal decision-making. There is a map behind the congressman which shows that 5 towns in Lamoille County have no, see, Rob's got the same map, have no broadband. Some places do have internet, but we find in our work that we work with some town offices where we have to be fully cognizant of how large a document that we can send. And the municipal clerks sometimes have bounce backs of documents they're supposed to receive from the state just because of the amount of speed they have. We also have, some of you with children know this, kids driving to the high school or the local library to do their homework because they don't have internet capacity at home. So it's really affecting all levels in this area, from the school up to people trying to run businesses at home. So we're very hopeful about the future because there are some options. I see a lot of providers around here who are working with towns, and I'm handing out an invitation from our office We are going to be back here on February 27th with Chris Campbell, and I think Rob, you'll be there as well, to talk with the towns about the communication union district option, which should, and the folks in the state talk about this more, create an opportunity for towns to work with providers to draw down federal funds that will be available in the future. The gentleman from Kingdom Fiber is here today, and I know that there are many towns in the Northeast Kingdom that are already working together to create a rather large communications union district, and some Lamoille County towns might be interested in working with those Kingdom towns to kind of create a larger entity which might have some economies of scale. Robert, Clay, do you want to add a few things about where we are right now?
Sure. Lamoille is not alone in its interest in forming communications union districts. We've seen a lot of movement all over the state, and Rob has maps of the state, which he can give you after the presentation if you're interested. But the communication union district, as you know, is the EC Fiber model, and that's worked really well in the Upper Valley. And
I'm on that. Really, it's been amazing. Yeah.
It's been transformative in the Upper Valley communities.
By the way, did you do the mapping?
We did, yes.
I just want to interrupt on that. That was like a breakthrough in Washington. No, I'm serious. I just want to say there was such rhetoric that was being given about the mapping and how the big companies were coming in saying how they provide service. And of course, it turned out that every one of these grid spots, if one person in that grid got service, then that whole grid was determined to have been having access to the internet. It was total BS, right? But it was real problem to get past the assertions by the big providers. And the mapping that you guys did was like a total breakthrough, because everyone on my committee, R&D, said, you know what, that's exactly how it is for us. So I just want to thank you for it. It was very practical. You went around and measured it. And so it went beyond rhetoric into actual measurement. And it's really changed the whole rhetoric about mapping. So thank you.
It was a fun project for us. And it was unfortunate that the FCC decided to cancel the program. That was the whole purpose of the mapping. So we outsmarted ourselves. Right. But it's been very helpful for everyone to be able to see exactly where service is, and our mapping is informing where we need to be investing, and certainly the FCC has different ideas about that, but we're hopeful that they're starting to move in the same direction we are with being more specific with mapping. But the communication union district model, we can reproduce that. If we can reproduce that in other areas of the state, do what EC Fiber did, or set up an opportunity for communities to work with providers to give them the broadband that they want.
Right.
I think that would be transformative to the state. So we're seeing that happening. Lots of communities are looking at the kind of maps that we have behind you, and thinking about what they can do. And I think this time next year, we're going to have communication union districts like EC Fiber all over the state. In the Northeast Kingdom, one of the biggest. There's some movement in Lamoille County, but also southern Vermont. And I think that that's going to change kind of the discussion both in the state and the regional level about what communities can do for themselves.
Okay, there's 44 towns voting on town meeting day to create communication union districts.
So is this follows kind of the EC Fiber model?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's been pretty economical, right?
Yeah, it's certainly kind of the best broadband you can buy, and they've done very well so far, and they're now doing entire towns. So That's something that took 10 years to get to the point where they are today, but I think the idea here with the broadband bill that the state passed last year was to kind of fast track that and make sure it doesn't take 10 years, but something shorter.
Okay, some of the towns want to talk about what's going on.
Let's talk to Johnson. Doug, you want to talk?
Well, it's a problem of knowing where to go, what the technology is going to be. We have we appointed a broadband committee, and the broadband committee did a survey, and there's no question about the need. The question is how to get there, and it's really a question of, we aren't following the money, where's the money to make this go? How are we going to do it? Can we do the EC fiber model? Do we do, what about the municipal putting in money on this? It's very difficult to get started, and our committee had some, we felt on the select person, we felt that they sort of weren't progressing, so we've tried to light a fire under them because it's absolutely important. Johnson in Lamoille County is one of the counties that is actually growing in the state, and we have we have particular problems. We are 70% served. The village is served, and some of the major 100C and Route 15 are served. But a lot of the lovelier surroundings, the hills, the places where people could relocate and bring their jobs, there's no market for that because we don't have broadband. I had foster kids there, couldn't do their school lessons. How we get that, a place that in the 70s was a wonderful place to move is not really marketable at this point to a great degree to the people who you think would want to buy it because there's no broadband. It's a dead thing.
And
so
that's what the real estate folks are saying. You can't sell it without broadband, right?
So we need, some solution, and we don't want it in 10 years, or we'd like it faster than that. So I guess, Brian's taking a bite, so I won't pass it. Yeah, but, I think our broadband committee will come through. We've got models. We've had great help from the LCPC and Leah to provide us with direction. But if there were money, it would be a great help.
But there's two things. Money matters, but the plan matters.
Oh, yes.
Because we can spend money ineffectively. We're pretty good at that down in Washington. Well, it's true, as you know, unfortunately. So getting the plan right and the model right, I think with some flexibility. And my sense is that our local providers have a stake in making it work. The big providers don't. Really don't. I mean, it's an annoyance for them because it's just not where they get their profits. So I don't know if some of the other town folks want to weigh in.
In Belvedere, where we have 300 and some people, and according to Consolidated's information, 209 locations. So it's not big, not very big. And yet there are people there that are interested. I teach at CCV. It takes me an hour to grade. If I go to my daughter's, who has Xfinity in Newport, it takes me 10 minutes to do the same thing. It takes me 9 hours to update my Mac operating system when they come out with a new one. So I've been keeping records of this. And one thing I think that would really help me, because there are a small number of people in Belvedere that are really interested in doing something about this. They either work from home or they have kids, all kinds of reasons. And I went to meetings with, and I heard from Kingdom Fiber and the Nulties with MC Fiber, and we heard Consolidated. And what we really need is more than that map, which is great, is in order to talk to 300 people, so this is like person to person, we're not gonna do big like this.
Right.
This is town meeting at Belmont. Right. So if we, well, we do a little more than this. Anyway, I would like to be able to tell people, because Kingdom Fiber included Belvedere in a study, we're in a study, it's like, we didn't even have to ask for this, right? And because they're coming through areas near us, so is MC Fiber. Consolidate is already there. What I need to talk to people is, these folks will do it and it's gonna cost this much a person. These folks are gonna do it, it's gonna cost this much a person. And these are the speeds you can max out. To me, the MC Fiber offered the highest speed. You have to pay more, but some of us would do that if we then got return on that investment. So that's where I find myself, in a very small town of Belvedere, and there's very interested people. There are local entities that have included us in their studies, but we need to know we're going to be included in the end result. That's what happened 10 years ago with the whole VTEL thing. Oh yeah, roll, yeah. And we were not included in the end of that. So that's kind of where we are.
Thank you.
I would just like to share with the towns who may not be aware of the process of actually trying to bring fiber to any town once there's a gleam in the eye. It's almost a 2-year process because of the time it takes to get a license to attach to the poles. And also the fact that in Vermont, you've got a weather window roughly between December and March when you can expect that maybe half the time no construction can be done. So there is a regulatory and a physical barrier to rapid rollout. So you have to understand that even with the best intentions, which we have, there's a process that you have to go through that makes this a very long, drawn out to be able to, before you can even deliver the goods.
Well, some of those process issues are more state, aren't they?
Yes.
So that's not that, but which is important. But maybe I don't know if anybody from the state can respond to that.
Pole detectors, I think we've actually done a lot of work as we participated in workshops. So pole attachments continue to be an issue. But I think they're certainly better. We instituted a one-touch make ready. So that allows one contractor to go move all attachments rather than rolling 4 trucks to move 4 different attachments, and a self-help remedy, which I think will improve pole attachments issues a little bit, right?
Clay,
On that point, I was one of the authors of the pole attachment law in the late 70s, when I was the chief economist of the Senate Commerce Committee. I wrote much of the law, not all of it, but certainly important, the federal law. That's actually rather a good law and has rather good provisions that are favorable to attachers, as you can imagine. As one of the founding members of the Organization for the Preservation and Survival of Small Telephone Companies in PASCO. Amazing thing. But that law has an important weakness. It permits states to take over the implementation of the law. And that the conditions are the states have to create their own regulatory. If they do that, they have to create a regulatory regime which is compliant with and consistent with the intent of the federal law. That's a very difficult thing to enforce. In fact, mostly isn't. There are at least 20 states in the country where effectively it is impossible for a newcomer to attach to poles, because the regulatory regime in those states is dominated by the large carriers who don't want it to happen. Vermont, fortunately, is not in that class. We're not as bad as the worst, but we're not very good. We did preempt the federal law We have our own system. It is less inconsistent with the spirit of the federal law than many others. We do ultimately get the licenses at great cost and great delay and great trouble, but we do ultimately get them, and there are plenty of states where you simply can't get them at all. So, yes, you're right, a lot of the problem is state, but it started with a mistake at the federal level. A mistake which has never, there's never been even the slightest sign of will in the federal government to say, no. The federal law prevails. You can't preempt unless you accept, to get really rough about insisting that state laws are consistent with the federal law.
Listen, taking into account what you said, Vermont's not in that category. I mean, we in Vermont can move ahead without, you don't need the.
Yeah, but it's very tough.
We're not doing it. And just to
We're
get.
not the worst. We're not the worst.
I'm trying to just, who's got what responsibility here? Because I understand what you said, to the extent that some adjustments have to be made, they could be made in Vermont. And there's it won't take effect, it's harder to pass a federal law than it is to deal with the state, and that, I'm finding that to be.
I think this is not necessarily a legislative matter. I think this is the statute, the federal statute says if the state preempts, they have to create a regime which is consistent with the intent of the federal law. But nobody polices that.
I understand, but what I'm saying is that does it really need to be policed in Vermont versus some other state?
Yes. Our state is better. Our state is definitely better.
That's not a good plan. No,
Okay.
seriously. No, in the sense that to try to get the federal government to be policing Vermont, when we've got all these Vermonters here who, most, in my experience, would prefer to be policing ourselves than be.
That's a fair point.
Dealing with Washington.
And progress is being made. The recent law that Blake mentioned was definitely a step forward. We haven't actually seen anything on the ground yet, but it's the letter of the law is a step forward, and we're eagerly awaiting its implementation without a tremendous amount of hope on it.
But there is still a huge scope for improving the pole attachment regime, regulatory regime in Vermont. Just to give you an example, I'm in the process of making new pole applications, pole attachment applications. Each utility, 2 electric utilities and 1 telephone utility have their own forms. There is not one standard form that you can complete and submit to whomever you have to submit to. Double the work.
Another example of the kind of ways this is, there's a schedule for the regulatory process, which takes roughly 6 months, from the time you submit an application to the time you can connect somebody. If it's honored, which it, frankly, 50% of the time isn't. That's the process. Now, an example of how that game is played, the first step is you submit an application, 30 days, you have a right out to go to every pole and see what has to be done. 30 days after that, the the utility comes back and says, okay, we've agreed what has to be done, that'll cost you $73,000. Then the clock stops until they get the money. You can ensure we write that check immediately. Not infrequently, they quote, lose the check. I'm not kidding.
We gotta stop here.
Yeah, so can I just say, I recognize that there are pole attachment issues, but that's getting a little esoteric. We
Right.
have a lot of community folks here, and I think one of the kind of great things, but also challenging things about this broadband initiative is it does depend so much on community volunteers and people working at the municipal level to get things done. So, but we have George from Cambridge and Jeff from Waterville. Would you like to share a few thoughts?
I'll just tell you where we're at in Cambridge. I'm on the select board. We're covered almost 100% by consolidated communications with DSL, which is really not satisfactory in today's world. We have no Comcast cable in our town, unlike most other towns in Lamoille County. Cambridge has been served since the 80s for cable by Stowe Cable. and they have offered internet since sometime in the 90s. We also have more recently Mansfield Community Fiber on two sides of us, in Underhill and in Fletcher, and they cover little pieces of Cambridge. Stowe Cable is in the process of adding fiber to parts of Cambridge. And within Cambridge, we don't have a broadband committee, but last year we asked our Economic Development Committee to take that on and effectively be our broadband committee. And Tim Humphrey is chair of that committee, and he's here. And I don't know if you want to add anything more. We've just gotten going in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, I would just add one thing. Usually this conversation focuses mostly on infrastructure and on physical access, but something we've spent a lot of time talking about is affordability. So in a market that's still going to remain either a monopoly or an oligopoly, depending on what town you're in, you know, if your only choice is DSL that doesn't really work for $35 a month, or fiber that's really good for $85 a month, it's still going to leave a lot of people in a really bad situation.
Right.
So I think that's the hardest thing for us right now.
So how do you deal with the affordability?
I don't know. I mean, I understand, you know, I heard Tim Nolte say that you don't even need government money to build out a fiber network. You can, there's an economic business model. And I can, you know, I'm served by Stowe Cable fiber to my house, and I get great internet speed, but I'm lucky. I can pay the $80 a month to have it. Are we going to close the access to information gap if that's the cost? I don't think so. So you can subsidize it on the front end with a build out. There are things that are subsidized on the back end, and I don't know what the right number is. I don't have the prescription. I just know that I think some people, $80 a month just for their internet is going to be a stretch.
Did you have something, Bruce?
I was just I'm from Woken, I'm the planning commission, we're just getting started. And Leah's been doing a terrific job helping us out in that regard. I went down through a list of all those services that we commonly have, that we have now, and I'll just read them off quickly, but there's Consolidated, VTEL, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint. They're all they're cable companies, they're satellite, the Dish, and DirecTV. So we have a lot of services now, but they're very scattered, they're redundant. Each company's trying to beat the other up to stay in business. Some of these companies have a lot of service already that could be used if we could bring it together in a simpler fashion, but just adding communication union districts around Vermont may scatter it further if they're all independent from each other. So it's
No, but that's an interesting question, because, you know, the big carriers aren't going to come in.
That's Consolidated, but where I live up on East Hill, or Town Hill, they have fiber running up into those districts, as I understand it. So you don't need to lay new fiber up on those poles, it's there. So if you could work with Consolidated and kind of bring those things together, I think it would be a big help.
And it's Jeff Austin from Consolidated. And we're doing that a lot. A lot of these conversations around the region, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, and like I said, congressmen around the country, are certainly creating exciting new opportunities. We've got Act 79 in Vermont that was passed, just about 8 months ago, and the Communication Union District and momentum coming from there. So we've partnered, just as an example, we're about a year behind New Hampshire and Vermont with kind of that revenue bond kind of opportunity to fund broadband, the public-private partnerships. And we've partnered with Chesterfield, New Hampshire. We built fiber out there to the whole town in about 6 months. We've won another 4 RFPs, based on that same model. And we're partnering, we've actually had a lot of conversations with different towns in Vermont about doing the same thing. So there's a lot of very interesting conversations going on related to broadband. But I think what Tim mentioned about the affordability, you need to be able to figure out the right model per town or a communication union district to make sure you can build, you're hopefully not overbuilding, because ultimately if there is service, you want to be able to get the most bang for your buck, basically. Create an affordable model and, ultimately get folks, really good broadband.
It's a real interesting dilemma because, it's like electricity, you gotta get it out there. And there are a lot of folks who probably couldn't afford it. And
electricity prices are regulated though, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's a good point, but it's still, there's an affordability issue always. And how are we going to address that so that folks who can't necessarily afford it but need it and their kids do, how do we address that? And I think you posed it nicely with you subsidized it up front or after. But if you don't even have the infrastructure in place, you don't have the luxury of trying to address the affordability question.
The problem is if you wait until after to talk about affordability, though, you might end up in a system where it's too late. You know, and when you have 1, 2, if you're lucky, 3 providers, and it's almost completely unregulated, right? This isn't TV, it's not electricity.
Yeah.
How are you going to address it after the fact? Other than some massive federal legislation that changes that. And I'm not suggesting that's the right way to go. In Cambridge, we're actually fortunate. You know, we have almost universal DSL coverage, which for some people works okay. We have Stowe providing service to a lot of people. I consider us to be fairly fortunate. But on a smaller scale, we still have the problems that everybody else has. And, definitely a significant gap between the service some people have and the service others have.
Let me ask you a question.
No, let's let some other folks talk here too. You guys have anything to say?
Well, Adriana and I are both students at Johnson, and I was talking with Carol earlier about internet speeds, and we are a university now, not that much has really changed on the ground for students, but to have really subpar internet speeds, it's a retention issue, and if students are a really big part of keeping Johnson alive, then how are we gonna keep a community if we don't have this built in? I mean, right now, I live in an apartment on campus and I pay, I don't know, $35 a month for really substandard internet, and that's just what I have to pay. I'm lucky enough I don't have to pay utilities, but and I have a support system. But if I was a first generation college student that was barely scraping by, working a couple of jobs, that money is a lot. And so taking into account the different levels of inequality in rural areas, I think, like Tim said, is really, really important. So we can include everybody on the front and the back end.
And I live in towns, and I'm a first generation college student working a couple of jobs, so it's really frustrating to put school first if you're trying to save money not living on campus, but you need internet to do your homework.
Right.
And I grew up in Craftsbury, and I had to go to the library in order to complete my homework even in high school, so internet accessibility has always been an issue for me, and it's just something that I've had to deal with my whole life. So it's like, I think the more we talk about it, the more it's going to get better, but it's definitely a barrier.
Yeah, one of the things it's interesting how a lot of these things are invisible until you experience it. I was living in Heartland when we had the dial-up. But I'm older, not younger. And younger is so integrated into everything you have to do. Whereas if you're a bit older, it's something new, and you've got your routines established. On the other hand, if you're starting a company, then whatever age you are, you have to have it. But those towns that have it, like Norwich now, that's where I live now, we have the EC fiber, it's fantastic, and but I'm listening to you, and you need it. So appreciate you guys coming. Rebecca, do you?
Sure. So I'm from Vermont Electric Cooperative, and so I appreciate what you said about electricity. And we're really spending, I would say, a full year kind of exploring what our role is beyond just supporting current companies in broadband, and whether there is a role for us. Thinking, we are good at infrastructure. We certainly are incredibly invested in vibrant rural communities in northern Vermont. And we have zero experience in a competitive environment and work telecommunications. And so just thinking about what makes the most sense for us to kind of support that kind of rollout and build out. Trying to do what we can around attachments to make it as fast as possible, while we still maintain a really strong electric infrastructure. So those are kind of the questions we're tossing around and trying to participate and listen and support in ways that make sense.
My name's Carol, and I'm on the Hyde Park Fiber Committee. We formed last year, and we've listened to a number of presentations. Leah has also been immensely helpful to us. And this year we decided not to have a vote on the Communications Union District. We felt we needed a bit more information before we put that to town meeting. I think Hyde Park seems to be in a little bit of a perhaps unique situation in that if you go down toward Route 15, there's plenty of options for internet. There's Consolidated, there's Comcast, the poles are full. If you want to get to the areas more toward where I live, then you have to cross Comcast territory, so MC Fiber to get up to us has to cross areas where there are full poles. Also, for them, speaking to what they were talking about, the costs for Make Ready, we have 5 power companies that serve our town. So for them to get permission, it would be complicated. So for a small town where we have about a little over 3,000 people, we have 5 power companies to deal with. So for me, it happens to be Vermont Electric Co-op. And as far as the costs go, costs do need to be reasonable because people don't just have broadband at home. They have cellular broadband that's almost equally as important. They need that communication when they're out and about. People aren't going to drop their cell phones just so they can have broadband at home, and they're not going to drop their broadband at home so that they can have their broadband on their cell phones. And neither of those are small costs. On a personal level, it seems odd to me. I moved to Vermont not quite 5 years ago from Cape Cod, and there, perhaps things have changed in that time frame. We had a lot more control over who was providing service to us. We had to approve who our cable provider was in town. If Comcast wanted to stay in town, we had control over that. We had to vote on that. Part of that, of course, this was done a number of years ago, we got a town-wide fiber optic network. And they installed that. So all the town buildings were networked together as part of the approval process. Laws have probably changed in that time, but even so, they still have some control over it, and maybe that helps to keep some competition, perhaps. But it seems like we have little control over what they're doing and what those costs are. They decide what they are, and we have to live with it.
Charlotte, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, with all the towns, we've met with 35, 40 towns since 2019, just talking about broadband, because communication really is the key. So if anybody's interested, I have a pocket full of cards. I live in South Burlington. We have a whole broadband group in northern New England, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So we're happy to have these conversations more town level.
Charlotte?
I'm on the Johnson Broadband Committee, and I'm also the Digital Systems Administrator for the Vermont Studio Center. So I'm kind of coming at this from both and I'm a Johnson resident. One of the issues we keep talking about with the Johnson Broadband Committee is getting broadband access to the last mile of Johnson, and we always kind of came into this thinking about, okay, getting it to all the little houses way out in the backwoods. And weirdly, one of the issues we keep running up against is getting access to Main Street of Johnson, which is all covered by Comcast right now. And kind of no matter who we go with in terms of getting our fiber access one day, they're going to have to compete with Comcast, and that seems to be kind of a problem for a lot of people because Comcast is so
Comcast, they don't build out outside of.
They're basically just covering like the Main Street village of Johnson and just a teeny bit outside of that. We use that at the Vermont Studio Center. We have different Comcast accounts for all our different buildings, which is frustrating, and we're frankly not in love with their service. We do a lot of online work, like all the applications coming in and so on for people who want to come here are all hosted in the cloud and so on, and it's just slow access. We want to be able to have better support for artists who come to do digital media stuff, and there's only internet access in some of the studios. There's no internet access at all in a lot of our buildings, and we're kind of looking at overhauling the whole system, but it's difficult when kind of the backbone internet coming into that is just not up to snuff.
So you literally can't get one bill from Comcast? It's
No, like we have a couple buildings that are wired together, like our main office supports a couple other connected buildings, but then we have buildings across the river. We have buildings with other buildings separating them, and it's a different account for each one.
Michael, you want to add anything? You've been
Sure.
at this a while. Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to put in a plug for CUDs. Even though I have a private company that's doing fiber in the kingdom, I think that model, it's not the only model, it's not necessarily the best model, but it's a really good one. And the reason it's good is because it aggregates enough communities together to get to some kind of critical mass to attract an operator. And that's really important. If you go it alone, no offense, Belvedere, but I think it's a lot harder. It's going to cost a lot more. But if you're joined up with other communities, you have a better chance of sharing the costs of running a system. Not that you have to run it, the operator that you bring in can be doing that. So that's one point. And I'm on the board of the second CUD in the state, CD Fiber. We've been in existence for 2 years, and we're going to be building at the end of this year.
Which towns?
It's Central Vermont towns. There's 18 of them.
And Elmore, right, from Lamoille?
Elmore, that's right. That's Central Vermont too to us.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's a Lamoille County town. And we share one town with EC Fiber, Montpelier. Another thing about affordability. Yes, $80, $85 is a lot of money to a lot of people. And for some people, it will always be a barrier. But if you take into account that you can get voice and video services over that same connection, that's probably cheaper than most people are paying now, if they add up the different individual services. And yes, we'll steal some customers from Consolidated, but when Consolidated does fiber in a town, they're going to steal customers from the video people too. So wherever fiber goes, you can put all three services over that fiber. And that brings affordability back a little bit. That's enough for me.
Just to put a number on what he was saying, that's a number. With an $80 or $89 really high speed fiber, we also provide voice anywhere in the United States, unlimited, for $5. And a full-fledged 140 channel video product from Snow for $40. So the whole is 125, right? 30. Most people pay way more than that now for their phone.
He's going into sales now.
No, that's the point he made. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Meredith?
Sure. I'm the village manager here in Johnson.
What?
And so the village includes a small municipal electric utility, of which there's about a dozen in the state. And as Rebecca said, we certainly appreciate and understand the need for broadband. The idea of electric utilities being somehow involved in the operation of them has been floated out there. We have our own concerns about our level of expertise. That's certainly not something that we're well versed in with our crew. We have a small crew that's responsible for electric, water, wastewater, and plowing. So to add broadband on top of that from a just feasibility standpoint may be difficult, but
you do everything in this.
But with that said, certainly, while the village is pretty well covered, I know there are some issues. We do at least have more than other places, But the health of Johnson beyond the village is very important to the village. If the outside of the village is suffering, the village will suffer. So we know something needs to be done. And, we certainly want to help and be useful in the capacity where we think we can without putting undue burden on our ratepayers. And we want to keep our electric rates affordable so we can support businesses that way. And how do you balance that with this other need?
Go ahead, Rick.
I'm with Stowe Cable. We've been here for quite a while. We're one of the last small operators I feel left. We're not a Comcast, we're just a small local operator, Stowe, Cambridge, and Jeff. And I work with a lot of the providers here jointly. VEC, Tim. We try to work, kind of think outside the box. And I think that the best opportunity we have as a small operator and as a group of local patrons is to work jointly together to try to break some of these fiber areas. And that's, we like to think outside the box any way we can. So, it's not Jeff, Cambridge, Stowe isn't just, it's our territory, but it's not, it's anybody can service these areas. It's how well you service it.
Right.
So if we, we even mentioned, there's an issue here, that's not part of this meeting, but it's cell coverage as well. We're not opposed to providing dark fiber to cell companies to get to that tower to help improve these situations. So it's a matter of working together. And I think if it's a joint effort, we can get a lot more accomplished than having 10 providers all going different directions.
That makes sense. So, a big question, I guess we're getting towards the end. So we keep you an hour, but two things. One, Dan, why don't you just kind of give a little summary of what's going on in the state?
Sure.
Because, there's a much closer connection with Montpelier than with Washington.
Yeah, I'm really interested in how these CVs are going to roll out and any issues that come up that maybe need any changes as, it's kind of a new thing. So, you've been doing it for quite a while, but, how, I'm not on Energy and Technology Committee, but, I'm also trying to follow what's going on there. And as issues come up, as we try to provide that to that last mile, especially keeping the costs affordable, because looking at the demographics with 1 in 4 being over 65 in 10 years, how are we going to, how can we use this for telemedicine and telecare? Being able to, try to even bring down some of our healthcare costs is going to be important. And if it's not there or not affordable, it's not going to help us get to that end. So.
Okay, Eric Johnson and Dave
Eric.
Johnson.
Thank you, Rebecca. Congressman,
Thank
you for the event. Thank you, Chairperson of the Johnson Select Board. I went to Johnson State back in the Mesozoic period a few days ago. I would say this, for us, for Vermont Electric Power Company, we're owned by Johnson, by Vermont Electric Co-op, or essentially a for-profit transmission-only company that's financially structured to give benefits to all our owners. We have a mid-mile fiber optic network, 72 strands, 1,500 miles now, which we're using. We need that for system reliability. It's critical. And I think, as you pointed out, Congressman, there is a convergence. And I'll give June Tierney, the current commissioner of the Department of Public Service, credit. She has identified that in terms of the use cases. Why is it smart to have fiber and broadband connectivity if you're going to innovate and get decarbonized and have more locally community-owned renewable energy? You need better communication.
Right.
There's a lot of reasons to do this.
Yeah.
So for us, concretely, where are we at? We are seeking to work at the federal level. I honestly didn't know necessarily about the Rural Broadband Caucus. That's an interesting fact I'd like to follow up on, quite honestly. But there is an FCC order came out Friday before last on the federal auction and the rules around saying about how you participate to get federal dollars. Our role is seeking to be as an information conduit with our mid-mile network. What opportunities are there for our owners consistent with where Vermont wants to go to utilize these dollars? As Rebecca pointed out, VEC is doing a feasibility analysis. Other of our owners are at various states of analysis, seeing what is our role, if any, to be able to do that. So we have an asset, it's in place. How do we better use it to accomplish what we're all trying to accomplish? There's a bucket of federal dollars. Let's see if it's usable. Secondly, several rounds, we've had conversations with Sylvia around the table. What can we do right now with these communication union districts? Those have been excellent conversations, but this stuff isn't gonna happen overnight. I mean, it takes time. Hear you on affordability, at least for us, we never divorce that question. It's always at the heart of what we're seeking to do. Consistent with what our owners and our collaborators, those a great example, we love working with those folks, how we can make that happen. So federal level dollars, how can we Vermont advantage that? State level, working with the communication districts. Also the working communities challenged by the Federal Reserve. They're in the midst of identifying and participating, bringing money to bear to help local communities revitalize a rural economy. We're seeking, is there a way we can tie in our network and give them somehow to avail themselves of our broadband network. Lastly, I'd said we're involved in some creative ideas and alternative regulatory strategies with the Department of Public Service. I don't want to get esoteric. We have filed a statement of generally applicable terms at SCAG. Is there a way we can file something else that for a constrained period of time, under a certain set of circumstances, Velco would be able to make that very, very cheaply available? We're just running through that now to see if that makes sense.
That's good.
So I would say this, federal government involvement, we're trying to get smarter, we're disseminating information, including to your office, Congressman, in terms of as we get information, what's happening there. We continue conversations and really now sharing a lot of information on specifics, where we have assets, where we have our substations, where might it make sense in local communities to drive down that cost of connectivity. Fundamentally though, we're also trying to think how to disrupt the market, how to drop the market fundamentally to hit this question of affordability. We have some ideas, but that's a bit of way off. Candidly, I think we're about, for real change, fundamental, substantial change, maybe 1.5 years, 2 years away to be able to do real stuff. But for the first time in my experience, I'm seeing real change, and I think the kind of level of collaboration we're going to need to future-proof, as you said, not just bring up to where we're at. So a lot of work that's going on. I think different people at different states of interest, there's a lot of risk. And this is a competitive environment, and how you get states involved to do this stuff, or local municipal entities, planning committees are just getting started in a very sophisticated, competitive market. There's some pretty big obstacles there. But I agree with you, Congressman, at the end, if we collaborate and we are mindful of our ability to deliver value consistent with what we've done before, I'm optimistic. I think there will be some things, we'll have some experiments that will be done, we'll have some larger regulatory strategies that we'll enact, and there may be an opportunity to avail ourselves of some of those federal dollars.
Last word from Tommy.
All right, well, I just wanted to thank the congressman for joining us here today, and for everybody who's been working so hard on this issue. I appreciate everyone showing up. Of course, you all know you probably couldn't have Skyped in anyway. We're very happy to have you, and I want to remind you about the meeting on February 27th. Chris Campbell will be here to wade into the intricacies of communication union districts, and this is a real opportunity, as Carrick mentioned, that there are federal dollars that will be available to draw down if you manage to position yourselves appropriately. But it will take an awful lot of hard work. And I really appreciate you listening to us all, and thank you, and there's lots of food left.
Yeah, let me say that, and I'll give the last word. Number one, thank you. Number two, where there is progress, going back to the beginning, is there's a growing recognition in Washington that we've got to get broadband high-speed future-proofed out to rural America. So a lot of the challenge in a political environment, Dan, as you know, no different than in Montpelier, what's the agenda? What's the goal? And if there's a commitment to the goal, then the work starts to begin. We start the work. Now, when you start doing the work, as I've heard here, the practical implementation issues are really significant. Everything from Belvedere, where you've got a very few people, but you need the high-speed internet just as much as you need it in Burlington, to the fragmentation of the delivery system, to the legacy issues of what the needs are of the electric companies with their poles, and some legitimate questions about safety versus some bogus questions about keeping you at arm's length. All those are practical implementation issues. But now we're seeing in Montpelier a focus by the legislature on trying to get involved in this. What we can do in our office is be a contact about what the federal funds are and may become, all right? And we're, Rebecca Ellis from the head of my Vermont office is here, but our job is to be helpful to you and try to be successful in your own communities. That's our job. So you call us and or we'll reach out to you when there's something we think that might be of help to you. In the meantime, I know, Dan, the state is doing things, and I think on this bull attachment issue and trying to work out the practical challenges. Tim, with all what you said, I think that's much more, it's got much more potential for practical resolution at the state and local level than it does in the swamp of Washington, okay? But
I don't disagree.
yeah, all right. But I just have to say, I really appreciate the incredible amount of work that's being done in our communities. You know, that it's really hard, but it's really important because if we're going to revitalize Vermont, it has to begin in Vermont. I hope we can be helpful and not as much of an impediment as Washington sometimes has been. We can be partners with you, but it's really tremendous and pretty inspiring to see all the work that everyone here is doing. I'm so grateful to the students showing up. No, that's it. That's really, really important. You're exactly right. It's real life. I mean, how are you going to get ahead if you don't have a level playing field to compete? So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for hosting us. And there is more food. More food. Yeah, more food.
And if anybody wants maps of other counties, just